Welcome back to my channel. This is Chicky Bean Loves Books. My name is Jenna. I'm trying so hard to remember to introduce myself every single video. This is my March wrap-up, and there are a lot of books to go through. I will be doing it as I have been doing for all of 2022. Fiction choices. I'll pull a prompt from the teacup, will read it, and I will respond to the question about one of the many books I have stacked on the floor beside me. My dog has just heard me talking and woken up and come to see, oh, what's going on? Does it involve food? No, it doesn't. Kind of it does. Let's just dive into this. Usually on these wrap-ups, ever since starting the Teacup Questions, I have first gone through the nonfiction read for the month. The first three nonfictions I'm going to talk about here are books that I read for the Herstory-a-thon. And they were books that I was going to read anyway, but they fit for the Herstory-a-thon. And I only read 3 books. I think that if it happens again next year, I will definitely plan a real dedicated reading list for it. The first one I'm going to talk about very quickly is In Defense of Witches, The Legacy of the Witch Trials and Why Women Are Still on Trial by Mona Chollet. It has a foreword by Carmen Maria Machado. It was translated from French by Sophie R. Lewis. And this is a solid book. It's well-researched, very informative, lots of information about how misogyny oppresses women and always has. And it does make what I consider to be very obvious connections between witchcraft trials of old and women's treatment today. Then I read The Dark Queens by Shelley Puock, The Bloody Rivalry That Forged the Medieval World. This read like action, adventure, fantasy fiction, but it was all fact. It is fascinating to read about these 2 rival queens, how they became queens, how they came into power at all, and the influence that they've had on history. It was fascinating, absolutely fascinating, so well written. The last, I don't even know, 75 or more pages are resources. Extremely well researched, but presented in such a consumable way. Absolutely loved it. Shelley Puock is going to be an auto-buy history author for me now. Then I read My Mess is a Bit of a Life, Adventures in Anxiety by Georgia Pritchett. This is one of the most beautiful memoirs I have ever read. It is heartbreaking and inspiring and wonderful. It's told in a series of very short vignettes, many of which could stand alone and yet work together to create deeper meaning. It covers her childhood, some pivotal moments in her childhood, both in her life and in the world. It covers her search for love. It covers her attempts to have children. It covers her raising of a special needs child, a neurodiverse child, with some health issues. And it will absolutely break your heart in the best possible ways. And I was so sad when it ended. I wanted this woman to keep talking. Evicted, Poverty and Profit in the American City. I read this as the recommendation from the American Library Association. And when I say recommendations from the American Library Association, I mean from this book that was given to me for Christmas. 52 award-winning titles every book lover should read, a 1-year journal, and recommended reading list from the American Library Association. And I am not reading all the books that are in here. Some of them I have already read. Some of them I have just absolutely no interest in. But I found that a lot of the nonfiction books that are mentioned in here that I have not read yet have really been things I would never pick up, but that I'm loving so much. And Evicted is an excellent example of that. This was from 2016. It is about the ways in which the poor are kept poor, manipulated and oppressed by the people who are just lots of times just one step less poor than them. It covers the story of 8 families, real families, trying to keep a roof over their head, and the many things that they must do in order to just have the basics in life. Loopholes are used and laws are broken and laws are changed to keep them from having a safe place to call their own. It's really atrocious, but also hopeful, because Matthew Desmond, although this is from 2016 and we have a real, nobody listens to him, but Matthew Desmond lays out some excellent solutions, some excellent stopgaps, some excellent changes that could make a huge difference in a large segment of our population in this country being the United States. I love it. It won the Pulitzer Prize in 2016. I had never heard of it. If you were like me and missed it, I highly suggest you pick it up. It's really, really well written. And then finally, I read this anthology. 30 authors of color contributed poetry, nonfiction essays, little memoir vignette pieces about their experience and understanding of the connection between culture and place. So this is ecology writing, and I absolutely loved this. Really beautiful. It looks like a textbook, but it does not read like one. So I highly suggest that you grab this if you have an opportunity to grab this. It's also on Audible. You can listen to it. I did not find that I needed to, but you can listen to it on Audible. I just realized I have one more nonfiction. And that is the other book that I read for the Read Harder Challenge this month, which was The Apartment, A Century of Russian History by Alexandra Litvina and Anna Desnitskaya. This is an excellent book. It is a century of history using a graphic novel type feel. It also uses a Where's Waldo kind of situation where you can hunt for different objects. It shows you an apartment. It was a real apartment. This is based on fact that existed, and how it changes over the course of a century in Moscow. And the changes are socially motivated and politically motivated. And it's absolutely fascinating, but you can look for, because the apartment stayed in possession of one family for most of that century, you can look for the same objects as the decades roll by, and it's absolutely fascinating. So well done, so inventive, so enthralling. I highly recommend this book. Really well done. Now, all of that is out of the way. Let's pull some teacup questions. Normally I just randomly grab things, and I am going to randomly grab, but I'm going to do it through 3 distinct stacks. I have a stack of books that I read because I was going to read them this month. They are my planned TBR that I have for every month. And then I have a stack of books that I read for March Mystery Madness. And then I have a stack of books that I read for middle grade March. So, and I will pull a question for each of them. Let's go through the books that I read because I was going to read them anyway, not for a readathon. So one of my pre-orders was No Filter and Other Lies by Crystal Maldonado. Pre-ordered this because I absolutely loved this author's first book, which was Fat Chance Charlie Vega. That's right here. I highly recommend Fat Chance Charlie Vega. This one was, meh. Okay, we have our teacup questions. I'm gonna pull this one. If this book were a meal, it would be, all right. If this book were a meal, it would be takeout Chinese food. It's pleasurable during the experience. Afterwards, it doesn't last very long and you kind of forget about it and you need to eat again. Then for my reread, I had The Other Side of the Sun, a novel by Madeleine L'Engle, who is the author of A Wrinkle in Time. I read this when I was a teenager and I loved it. I read it again for the first time now and I loved it. It does have some issues. It was written in 1978 and it is about a British woman who marries a man in England, but he's an American from the Deep South. And he has to go to Africa because of his work. She is sent to live with his family, his extended family in the South, to wait for him to come. And she's British, so she's not fully aware of how deep the Civil War arguments still run, even in World War I, which is when the majority of this book takes place. It starts in what would be a contemporary time, which was the 70s, but it looks back, and then it looks even further back. But there's some terminology that's used that still feels outdated, no matter what the intent is. So you have to read around that because it is a product of its time in that way. And then there are two neurodiverse characters, two twins, who are not handled in the greatest way. They're not represented in the most believable way. The ultimate purpose and theme of this book is equality and equity. And it succeeds in doing that, in presenting that. But just know, going into it, that it's outdated as well. The question is, do the book math explain? The book math is a phrase that I took from Jen Campbell. She is a British author and book reviewer and former bookseller, and she does just the greatest videos, and she does the book math sometimes, where she takes an element from one book and an element from another book and puts them together and says together they would equal this book. So think if you took Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, that kind of gothic fiction with mysterious past and a kind of naive, she's less naive, Stella is less naive than the character in Rebecca, but a naive heroine who's young and just married. So let's take Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca and marry it with, or add it with, William Faulkner. Short stories, probably. So marry William Faulkner to Daphne du Maurier, and you have something akin to The Other Side of the Sun. Then this one also fits for March Mystery Madness, but I'm reading Miss Marple a month, and this is the third Miss Marple. I loved this book so much. This was such a fun ride, but this is Agatha Christie's The Moving Finger. I'm just going to pull a question here. Let's pull this one. If this book were a land form, it would be... That's not an easy question. It would not be a mountain. I think I'm going to cheat a little bit. This isn't a land form, but it can create a land form. I'm going to say this book would be a mirage. I know, don't come at me, I'm cheating. But I would say this book would be a mirage of a land form. You think you know what you're seeing, a valley or a canyon or a plateau, mesa or a mountain, but it's not what you think it is. Then I read another Rosamund Pilcher. So let's go ahead and pick a question. All right. This question asks, talk about the plot. What was most important, the characters or the plot? Was the plot moved forward by decisions of the characters, or were the characters at the mercy of the plot? Was the action believable? What events in the story stand out for you as memorable? Was the story chronological? This is super long. Was the story chronological? Was there foreshadowing and suspense, or did the author give things away at the beginning of the book? Was this effective? How did it affect your enjoyment of the book? So this is an interesting set of questions for this particular book and my experience with it. Basically, you have two characters. I'm not going to remember what their names are right now. Victoria and Oliver. Victoria and Oliver had a relationship, kind of, when they were a little bit younger, Victoria especially younger, which was ended because Oliver got another woman pregnant and married her. And he was never exclusive with Victoria or the woman that he married. He has a child, of course, because that's why he gets married, with his wife. She dies young. And he decides one day on a whim to kidnap his child from his wife's parents, the child's grandparents, who have raised him for the last 4 years. He just takes him and shows up on Victoria's doorstep. And the story unfolds from there, because Victoria doesn't seem to be able to make any decisions or be proactive in the presence of Oliver. She just does whatever Oliver says. And this tendency takes them to Scotland and takes them through a faux relationship until things kind of escalate to a point and everything changes. That's all I will say, in order to keep the plot unspoiled for you. The most frustrating thing for me about this book was the character of Victoria and how it's understandable or believable that she would be easily persuaded by Oliver even at a later date. Over the course of the novel, it is not believable that she would continue to not become more proactive about making decisions for herself. Then another pre-order I had was Gallant or Gallant. I'm not sure how to say it. Everybody I hear says it Gallant. That feels weird to me. I don't know why. I have no reason why that feels weird to me. But it is by V.E. Schwab, and I have a lot to say about it, but first let's pick a question. It's another long one. This one asks, this is really apropos. Okay, what was unique about the setting of the book? Did it enhance or take away from the story? Could the same story take place in a different location or time period? Discuss various alternate time periods and settings. Think about the ways they might have changed the story. So this is a fantasy, and the setting is everything. The setting is everything. There's like kind of like a parallel universe or like a veil, and there's a world in front of the veil and a world behind the veil. It's set in a similar world to ours, but totally different. It is about a girl who has been raised in a kind of like a boarding school. She ends up going home to Gallant or Gallant, meeting death, kind of going beyond the veil, behind the wall. I don't know. She's looking for her father. Things happen. It read like a dream. It's written in a weird feeling. It's written in a weird way. It's written in the present continuous tense. So everything is always happening all the time now. I am opening the door. I am walking through the wall. I am watching the dancers. They are dancing now, then, and forever. And this present continuous tense is kind of kept pretty consistently. There are moments where I think the wording would just be too weird, so they go into just a normal tense, a more common tense. Yet most of it is written consistently in this present continuous tense, which gives it this very weird, dreamlike quality, which I'm sure is what she was going for, which I detested. I am going to put an Instagram post here from V.E. Schwab, from Victoria Schwab, which talks about how she made a decision, or is her pronoun they? I don't know. Let's just say they. They made a decision to always write each book for a different audience. When I pick up a Pilcher, I think I will be able always to know what I'm going to get. I love it and I respond to it because Pilcher was writing for me as a reader. When I pick up Diaz, which I'll talk about in a moment, I know that I'm going to dislike it immensely because he does not write for me as a reader. So they have an audience that they're focused on reaching. V.E. Schwab recently posted, I just poked myself in the nose. V.E. Schwab recently posted this Instagram post where they discuss that they made a conscious decision early on in their career that they would not write every book for the same audience, that they would in fact try to write each book or series for a unique individual audience, a different reader. We as readers of V.E. Schwab will never really know before we read one of their books if that book is written for us or if we will not connect with it. And I see that. It's just not written for me. It's just not my thing. And I've heard a lot of people say, like, I'm gonna give one more V.E. Schwab a chance and then I'll decide if this is an author for me or not. But that's the thing. We can't ever give up on V.E. Schwab, because some of their books are going to hit us perfectly and some of their books are going to repel us. And that's interesting to me. I mean, that's interesting to me from a creation standpoint. And I am really glad that they said that, because in their post, because I had never thought of that before. Like I tend to, like I just said, that so-and-so is going to be an auto-bi history author for me from now on, because I feel like I can depend on that person to create a similar book, which I will react to similarly, because they are an author and they've created this thing that I was somehow responsive to. Whereas with V.E. Schwab, over and over again, I will be responsive to it in a very positive way, or I will be repulsed by it in a very negative way. And it's really, really quite an interesting conversation to have in the author-reader juxtaposed communities, because what is an author's responsibility? Is it to create? Is each piece that they put into the world to be consumed or appreciated for what it is? I mean, is each piece a piece of art? I think it used to be that way, and I think within the world of literary fiction, I think literary fiction authors think of themselves in that way. Best-selling authors probably feel the need, pushed by their readership, to create the same thing over and over and over again. And is that fair? I don't know. I found it fascinating. And still need to think about it more. But what are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments. I gotta move faster through these. I got huge stacks left. Like I said, this was not a favorite. Read this for the American Library Association as well. This is this collection of short stories and just absolutely hated it. Let's go ahead and pick question, and maybe the question will help me tell you why I hated it. Let's see. The question is, how have the characters changed by the end of the book? I'm going to pick a different one because this is a collection of short stories. So I'm going to put that one back in and pick a different one. In fact, normally I don't answer a question for a collection of short stories, but let's just do it. Have any of your personal views changed because of this book? If so, how? Sure, I'll answer that. No, they have not. I mean, well, maybe yes. Maybe they have, because I went in with no idea of who this author was or how they wrote or what they wrote about, and I walked away going, what a misogynistic pig. Sorry to insult pigs. I hated this book. I hated this book with every fiber of my being. I did read it. It's very short. I kept thinking things will change. There's got to be an arc here. Things will adapt. Really, this is a series of short stories about how men treat women, especially within the Dominican culture. I feel like this is perpetuating some things that are not necessarily universally true. I think it's kind of some stereotypes, which is interesting coming from this author. Maybe I just don't get it. In any case, I hated this book. That's all I'm going to say. Then I read my Shakespeare for the month, which was All's Well That Ends Well. Let's pick... Ooh, if I pick that one, they're all going to fall, so hang on. All right. If you could talk to the author, what burning question would you want to ask? If I could talk to Shakespeare? Oh my gosh. If I could talk to Shakespeare, what burning question would I ask? About this book in particular, I suppose I should focus in. Or maybe not. So, All's Well That Ends Well is about a woman who kind of miraculously provides a cure for the King of France, who's having some issues with like a boil, but it's causing great pain. And she kind of like miraculously heals him, and he grants her anything she wants. And what she really wants is to marry this guy who doesn't like her. I mean, we're not even talking doesn't love her or ignores her. He actively dislikes her, and she actively loves him. She kind of also just wants to marry into the family. She's been raised with him, but she's not a real family member. She loves who becomes her mother-in-law because, of course, the king says, yep, this is fine. That's what you want. That's what you get. he runs away, and we spend most of the play listening to him whine about how terrible his life is because he's been forced to marry this woman who loves him. And she spends her time, most of the time in the play, trying to cajole, manipulate, force, coerce him into abiding by her, let alone love her. And then, in the end, according to Shakespeare, all's well that ends well. I would ask Shakespeare, do you even like women? Like, did you hate the female gender? Is it just your political moment, your social climate that has influenced you in this way? Did something happen to you? Like, why do you write such atrocious women in a variety of ways? Either they are too powerful and too awful, or they are too powerless and too awful. Did you not like women? That's what I would ask him, and I would want an honest answer from Will, from Shaky. Forever Amber. This was my Beans Big Book Bash pick. I'm not going to talk a lot about it because I'm going to film a whole video about it. Doop. This one. Evaluate the oh, this is so, I feel like the questions are like an 8-ball. Like they predict or they anticipate what will the best question be for each book. A lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time. Evaluate the moral structure of the protagonist. So the protagonist in this is Amber, and that protagonist is incredibly morally gray. More on that in my wrap-up video specifically dedicated to this book, which I loved. Let's move on to books that I read specifically because of March Mystery Madness. First, we have Truly Devious, which I just finished yesterday. It's a long one. Okay. What questions of probability arise in this novel? Select 2 or 3 events which would be most unlikely in ordinary life. Now the cup's just laughing at me. All right. In general, are the events of this novel made sufficiently probable to support its total design? So if you're unfamiliar with this series, it is about it's dual timeline. It's about a murder that took place in the 1920s in New York, and it is also about a girl in present day who's trying to solve that murder. And it's about a school for incredibly uniquely gifted students who can only attend if they receive an invitation. And it's not like acceptance, it's like the school seeks you out. So that's pretty improbable. It's also pretty improbable that the clues and things that this person finds, that the character finds, what's her name? Stevie. The clues that Stevie finds at Ellingham Academy, they're just like, they're so obviously placed. So that's a little bit sketch, or as my middle school students would say, sussy. There's a lot about this that just would not fly in reality at all. But if you suspend reality, it's quite a fun and fast-paced, not middle grade, YA mystery. The dual timeline was great. The 1920s portions felt uncomfortably awkward, as if it's just kind of poor writing, in comparison to the characters and the world that's being developed in the contemporary timeline, which I thought was excellent. You need to read the 1920s stuff, though, to know what's happening, but it feels like a caricature of the 1920s, as opposed to really understanding the 1920s. I do recommend it. It's quite fun. Then I read, this was not on my original TBR. There are lots of books on my TBR that I did not read, but it was a possibility pile. It was more than 40 books. This was not on it, but randomly I got the audio, and it is a mystery. So I read it for March Mystery Madness and listened to the audiobook about halfway. This was really hard to follow as an audiobook because it is, it's text messages and phone conversation transcripts interspersed with like court hearing letter things. Like it's lots of stuff. Basically there's a community theater troupe whose like organizer, their daughter has been diagnosed with cancer. She's young, very young, and they need to raise a huge amount of money for some experimental treatment. There's been a murder, but we don't know throughout the entire thing until the very end. We don't know who's been killed. Also, someone is not who they say they are. We don't know who that is until the very end. And as you're reading it, you're kind of trying to put things together. There are some transcripts that are missing or incomplete, so you do have holes in your knowledge. But you, along with a couple of, I don't know what they are, like lawyer people. I don't know what their role is, but they're looking through the evidence and trying to come up with a plausible explanation. They know who's been murdered, but we don't. And they're going through trying to mull through the evidence to create a storyline. It was fascinating and it was so well done, and I did not really know what was happening for over half of the book. It was great. It was great. It's a little slow to start. I felt it was a little slow to start, but that might have just been because I was having a hard time following things by listening. When I sat down and turned off the audio and just read it with my own two eyes, it went a lot better. Let's answer a question. Let's go for a short one. Sometimes the short ones are harder than the long ones, though. How would the story change if it were set 100 years in the past? Well, seeing as it's all based on technical communication, like technological communications, like phone calls and emails and text messages and WhatsApps, I don't know that it could be told at all. I don't know how it would change if it were set 100 years in the past, other than it would probably have to be just through letters. It would be harder to figure out because you'd have less information. A Quiet Life in the Country by T.E. Kinsey, the first in a Lady Hardcastle mystery series. Were there times you disagreed with a character's actions? What would you have done differently? Not really. This was Agatha Raisin by M.C. Beaton, set at the turn of the century. Small village, person trying to retire there from another line of work, lots of murders in this small village, fun sidekick, cute interactions, humorous moments, some suspense, some intrigue, but ultimately kind of dull, I felt, inconsequential. I doubt I will read any more of these, but it's fun, and if you enjoy cozy mysteries and things set at the turn of the century, then I suggest that you do pick these up. There's nothing inherently wrong with this. I enjoyed my time with it, but I just think that I fill that need for that kind of story when I want it by reading an Agatha Christie or reading an M.C. Beaton. And so my energy is just invested elsewhere, and I don't feel the need to start another series, which is so very similar to some that I'm already reading. I just finished this one this morning, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. It's a long one. Let's see. Did the story hook you right away? If not, what were your initial impressions? Did they change as you continue to read? Take a look back at the first chapter, discuss what the author did to try to draw the reader into the story right away. Did it work? So the very first chapter, if you're not familiar with this series, this is another YA mystery series. I believe it's a trilogy by Holly Jackson, and it starts with a junior who's on their summer vacation about to enter their senior year of high school, writing up a proposal for their capstone project that they would like to do their independent research on over the course of the year, and they are asking to research a true crime cold case that happened in their town within this character's lifetime. So that's pretty compelling. I was pretty enthralled from the very beginning. Like I said, I finished this morning. I will definitely be reading the second and third. I believe third is final book in the series. I am not the target audience for this book. I am older than the target audience for this book. Don't know if that contributes, but I feel like it probably does, because I feel like you would maybe be more distracted by a lot of the red herrings and the relationship stuff, the romance stuff that's in there, that's subtle but still in there. I feel like you might be more distracted by those things as a teenage reader than I was as an adult reader focused on the mystery. By page 140, I had figured out the entire thing. Some of it based on what I had been given, but most of it based on wise guessing. And then, so for the rest of the book, it was interesting to watch how the writer unfolded my assumptions based on other mysteries of a similar vein that I have watched and podcasts that I have listened to. There's not a lot of originality in the actual ultimate reveal for this particular part of the mystery. However, that being said, the ride was so much fun. The voice was so much fun. The relationship, that romance that I'm talking about there, I would like to see where that goes. Although it's not my main focus or interest, I did find it intriguing. I read Verity by Colleen Hoover. Which character do you most relate to and why? Let me tell you about these characters. And I'm going to do it without spoilers because I know nobody has spoiled this book that I've seen. Even people who've done whole week-long blogs on reading it have not spoiled it. So basically, there is a writer who's hired to be a ghostwriter to finish Verity, this other author's, Verity's very famous and widely loved series, because Verity is in a coma due to a car accident. And so this ghostwriter is invited to Verity's home, where Verity's husband and son live and move, and where Verity is kept kind of in hospice. So that this ghostwriter can go through Verity's office, find notes, possible trajectory for the series so that they can write it as Verity would have written it. In looking for those notes, this ghostwriter discovers a memoir, Verity's memoir, which paints a pretty detestable picture of who Verity is. This kind of gives this ghostwriter an emotional green light to enter into a relationship with Verity's husband. And that is all I will say. That's maybe like the first fourth of the book. Please don't think that I've spoiled anything for you. There's so much more in this book. So do I relate to any of these characters? Not at all. Little Lord Fauntleroy. This was one that my students picked for me, my sixth graders picked for me to read as my older than me book, and I loved it. My question for it is, how has the protagonist changed from the beginning of the novel to the end? The protagonist is Little Lord Fauntleroy, and he starts out as a sweetheart and he ends as a sweetheart. I read these two. I'll talk about them together. These are by Ash, Oak, and Thorn, and by Rowan and Yu. This is the first book. This is the second book. I hope there will be a third and a fourth book. They're kind of seasonal, and they are about the little folk. They're not called the little folk. What are they called? The hidden folk. These are about the hidden folk, little people who guide and control and protect the wild world. And in the first book, their home gets destroyed and they start to disappear, like their hands are disappearing, their legs are disappearing. So they're forced to go on an epic journey, Hobbit style, leave their home and go and find other hidden folk to see if they can find out what's happening. Is it only happening to them, or is it happening to all the hidden folk? And they have lots of adventures along the way. They interact with a lot of wild animals and birds and kids, and it's just great. And then in the second one, I won't say too much about it because I don't want to ruin anything from the first one, but in the second one, they start to gain greater understanding of what is happening. These books are wise and kind and gentle and truthful and wonderful. I love them, and I cannot wait for more in this series. I hope there will be more by Melissa Harrison. I don't think these are readily available in the States. I did order these from Book Depository because I love Melissa Harrison, and I was taken by the covers, which I think are just so beautiful. But if you can get your hands on them, I highly, 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 I pressure you to get your hands on them. Let's do this one. One or more poems that I might associate with these books. William Blake's songs of Innocence, and I don't remember the rest of the title, but there's a collection of poems by, by William Blake. I'll put it up here, which I would associate. I would also associate the poetry of Emily Dickinson. I'll put up a sample cover here. And Emily Bronte. All the Emilys are coming out, so the poems of Emily Bronte as well. That would encompass like a childhood innocence and experience, I think. Songs of Innocence and Experience by William Blake. But it would encompass like the importance of childhood. It would encompass the magic of nature, and it would encompass deep spiritual wisdom through poems by those three poets. Then I read this one. This one was picked for me by my students. It's The School for Good and Evil by Soman Chenani. I liked this, but I didn't love this. Let's just answer a question about it. How does the cover art reflect the theme? If you don't think it does, what would you depict on the cover if you were the editor and the jacket designer? So let's look at the cover. So basic premise is that there's a town where once a year somebody comes to take some children, and one of the children that disappears from the town will go to the school for good and one will go to the school for evil, and it's all about like what's inside you. These two are kind of friends, kind of not. She firmly believes that she belongs to the school for evil, and she firmly believes that she belongs to the school for good, but when they are assigned to their places, she ends up at the school for good and she ends up at the school for evil, and they're kind of trying to put things back to rights as they see them throughout the course of this book. Cool. My students picked this one for me as well, and I loved it. I've added it to my favorite books of the year. Let's see what the question is. Which character or moment prompted the strongest emotional reaction from you? Why? This is a magical realism book. I did not know that going in. Also misunderstood the back when I read it. I thought it was going to be from the pigeon's perspective, but it is from the girl's perspective, except that she does believe she is a pigeon, kind of. So in the beginning of the book, a woman leaves a baby on a doorstep. The pigeons in an abandoned dovecote up at the top of the building where the woman has left the baby realize that it's winter and they're worried for this child. And so the flock comes down and they lift this swaddled baby up to their dovecote and raise her. And so when we re-meet her, she's like 8 or 9 years old, which magical realism, suspend reality. Then one day, and the moment that I'll talk about, because I don't want to give too much away in this long but wonderful book. So the moment that I emotionally responded to the most, that I'll tell you about, because it happens early on, is when the bird that she's closest to, that is kind of like her surrogate father, he gets sick and hurt, and they know that there's a woman, a human, who's kind and helpful, who has taken birds away before that have injured wings or whatever, and brought them back healed. So they tell her that she's going to have to take this surrogate father bird down to the healer, find the healer, and make sure that their bird gets healed. Well, of course, when the woman finds this girl carrying a pigeon who speaks in coos and is wearing a series of bags, shopping bags, she becomes concerned. And so that whole, like, as the girl begins to realize that she is not a pigeon and she's a human, and has to overcome some big fears. All of that is very emotional. It happens very early on. There's a whole lot more to this book. I loved this so much. I read this one, Our Castle by the Sea by Lucy Strange. We're almost done, by the way. Almost done. Were there any plot twists that you loved or hated? Okay, so the basic premise, there's a lot here. There's a lot here for such a short book. A little too much, I think. What I will say, so that I don't give many spoilers away, is that this book takes place in World War II times, along a British coastline, and an important British coastline, which I will not name right now. And the family lives in a lighthouse. The mother of the family is a German immigrant. She's married to a British man, and she's held in suspect. So this book deals with the incarceration camps and the trials that German citizens went through, or people of German ancestry went through in England during the war, similar to the Japanese incarceration that was happening in America at that time on the West Coast after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, except that in here, every former German citizen or person of German ancestry is given an actual tribunal trial to see if they can prove any wrongdoing, whereas in the States, we just incarcerated anyone of Japanese descent, regardless of affiliation or nationality or anything. Age, didn't matter. So her mother is held suspect. They have some proof that there's been some spying going on, some secret information. But is it the mother? Is it the father? Is it the sister? Is it none of them? Thimble Summer, which was a disappointment. I was really looking forward to this, but that's okay. We'll talk about it. How have the characters changed by the end of the book? I think they're just a little bit more aware of reality. So the basic premise of this one is it's the Great Depression, and a girl finds a thimble, which will bring her good luck, and it's about her interactions with people in her community and the things that are happening for them there, raising pigs and all sorts of things. It's a slice of life book. Each chapter feels like the Waltons, like an episode of the Waltons, if you've ever seen that TV show. And it just kind of, or Andy Griffith, and it just kind of stays in that vein. It felt a little dull. It felt a little plodding. There wasn't anything that was of super high stakes. There's not a lot of character development. The characters don't change much from beginning to end. It's really just a story about a family and kind of their day-to-day country life during this time period, which in and of itself can be fascinating, but 1 or 2 chapters was more than enough for me. Prairie Lotus. This was picked for me by my students. I had started it before, but didn't finish it, and so they wanted me to finish it, and it's my book with an Asian rep. So Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park. What does the author apparently wish us to think and feel about what happens to the protagonist? Well, she writes a note at the back of the book that tells you. So basically this is a retelling of it's a more inclusive and culturally responsive retelling of Little House on the Prairie of Laura Ingalls Wilder. It is set in something that is supposed to feel like Mankato, purposefully, because the author, Linda Sue Park, grew up, like so many of us in the States, like myself, grew up loving the Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House on the Prairie series. There is a young girl whose father is white, whose mother was raised by white missionaries, but was Chinese, and Korean, part Chinese, part Korean. And that mother has died. And so the father and the daughter are trying to make a life for themselves. All she wants to do is to go to school and graduate, and then become a seamstress in a shop owned by her father. Her father is not a very sympathetic character. He's very hard. He's very harsh. He makes snap judgments. He's kind of law-abiding to the point of racism. Then you have this girl who's in this town trying to go to school, but just being there causes trouble. The school families, they all rebel, and will she or will she not be able to just attend school? Ophis Ghost by Justina Ireland. Was the book satisfying to read? Why not? Loved this book. It is about a girl. What is her name? Ophi. It's called Ophis Ghosts. Duh. It is about a girl named Ophi. She is awakened by her father's ghost. Her father is killed in a lynching, which they don't go into the details of, but you know that there's been some aggression. He's been killed in a lynching, but she doesn't know he's dead, and his ghost wakes her up and says, you gotta grab this jar of money that's hidden here, and you gotta take your mom, and you gotta go to your hiding place in the woods, and you gotta wait until these men come and go. And she doesn't know what's going on, but she obeys her dad. She doesn't realize that he's a ghost until the next morning, when they realize that he is no longer with them. But he saves them. Ooh, I'm really close. But he saves them from pain and attack. And that is when Ophi realizes that she can see and talk to ghosts. They move to be closer to family, to Ohio, I believe, where they work as domestics in a house. And she sees lots and lots and lots of ghosts in this house. She doesn't always know who's a ghost and who's alive. Her aunt can also see ghosts, and so she's kind of training her how to handle this, and also telling her, ghosts they're not good. They're amoral. They're neither good nor bad, but they have a desire, they have a want, they have a need, and they're going to try and fulfill that no matter how it might hurt a living person. They aren't trying to hurt you, but they're also not trying to protect you either. They just have this instinct, this drive. And so she's kind of telling her to stay away from him. Just don't interact. But if Ophi wants to help everybody. And so Ophi gets involved, and that causes some problems. And it's great. It's such a good story, and it's set up to be a series, and I'm really hoping it'll be a series, because it is definitely a series that I will continue to read. I read an arc of The Resting Place by Camilla Stinn, which comes out later this month, I think in a couple of days, maybe on the 29th, but I read an arc of it. Camilla Stinn wrote The Village, which I really enjoyed last year. The second book coming out by her in English is The Resting Place, and it was one of my most anticipated books of the year. It is a mystery, and I will answer a question about it. Which character would you most like to meet in real life? None of them. They're super scary. They are super scary. I don't want to ruin this book for anybody, but it's a great thriller. It's a great mystery. It is a lot about doubling. There's a main character with this thing that's showing up in a lot of thrillers these days, but it doesn't feel overused or doesn't feel like poor representation. It's not like everything hinges on this in particular, or that it stops our reader from comprehending what's going on around them. It's just a hindrance. She doesn't have face recognition. I know. We keep seeing this. I know. But bear with it for this particular book, because this book is all about these doublings. So in multiple generations, you have people who are named the same thing. You have people who live the same stories. The same issues keep coming. And so it's really, it's all about blending the stories, the history, and her inability to distinguish one face from another. But she knows who everybody is based on the tone of their voice, based on their mannerisms, based on the way they do their hair, based on the clothing style that they choose, based on the way they carry themselves. She knows who people are. It's not like that. It's a great psychological addition to this general blending. And I know that what I'm saying isn't making much sense, because I don't want to ruin anything at all. And the blending is vital for you to know, but it's also vital for you not to know. So I'll just leave it at that. This was a book that you would not normally see me read. It was my In Real Life Book Club's pick. I agreed to it. I voted for it. I wanted it. I'm not sad I read it. I will not read more of it, or the series. That book is Strange Love by Anne. I don't know how to say her last name. Aguirre? I don't know. This is an intergalactic romance between an alien and a human. Let me pick a question and see what I can say about it. summarize as briefly as possible the single change that occurs to the protagonist during the course of this novel, taking care to specify whether this change is mainly one of fortune, moral character, or knowledge. How about location? Okay, so there's this alien dude, and he's been having some issues finding true love and being able to set up his nest to have children, which is really all he wants to do. And so he's been doing some dating apps, basically, and he's supposed to meet this alien chick who wants to try out to be his nest keeper. So he's supposed to meet her, but he gets lost. He doesn't have the greatest homing mechanism. I don't know. He gets lost. He has a bad sense of direction. And he ends up on Earth, and there's a woman, and she's kind of walking her dog, and he thinks that it's the alien that he's supposed to meet who wants to be his nest mate. So he takes her and her dog. He's a little confused. She's not quite what he thought she'd be, but it's a blind date, and you go with it, right? You go with it. So they fly off, but he doesn't know how to get her back. Once he realizes she's not who he thought she was, he doesn't know how to find his way back to return her to her planet. And so they kind of make this deal because he needs to have somebody who's going to go through these like gladiator type experiences to try to fight for the right to be his nestmate, these challenges. And so they have an agreement that she will go through them for him and maybe be his nest watcher. The dog is hilarious. The whole situation is hilarious. It's also pretty heartfelt. I will say I actually really enjoyed the writing. The sex scenes, not so much. Not at all, really. I don't think that intergalactic romance is my thing. It was remarkably well written for what it is, remarkably heartfelt and sincere and genuine and creative. I think the main change, the single change is I promise you there's thoughts going on in my head. I think the single change, like to pinpoint the one thing, there's not a lot of character development in this book, let me say that. But I think the one thing is that all of the two main characters, the alien male and the human female, they suspend expectation. They just go with the flow. It works out for them. It's sweet. It's sweet. If you think intergalactic romance might be your kind of thing, I would recommend this. I would definitely recommend this over Ice Planet Barbarians, of which I have also read the first. But this was really sweet. Really, really sweet. I skipped over all the sex scenes, all of them. Not my thing. But the story itself and the characters themselves and the world that was created. Anyway, this is super long. Super, super long. Because I had way more books that I read this month than I normally read this year. Normally I only read 25. We'll be back to that. We'll be way back to that in April. But this was fun and really long. And I will see you later. Let's go read.